Good afternoon, one and all. James here, the Ever Learner. Good to see you. Thank you for being part of this with us. We really appreciate it. Not least because you've also got paper 1 to think about, and paper 2 might even seem quite far off at the moment. So we really appreciate you taking part in this. Thank you very much. I've got to my right here, we've got Marta, who's going to be fielding the chat this afternoon.
Hello, I will.
And to remind you folks, the way you chat is if you're on a hub page, we've got a live chat in there. Just type in your question, it comes straight through to here. If Marta knows the answer, she'll answer it there and then for you. Otherwise, she'll bring it to me, and in the little gaps in the session, I'll answer those questions for you. So we actually take it as a real sign of value that you folks are asking questions that way. So please don't be afraid to do so. We do appreciate that you do it, and it gives us a sense that this is relevant and important. So thank you very much for that in advance. Now, you can do us a massive favour by subscribing to the channel and smashing that like button, okay? We really, really, really value you doing that. So it doesn't cost you anything whatsoever. Go down, hit that like. We appreciate it. It just boosts our little channel that bit further, and it means that we get a bit more traction in the searches and things like that. So it's really useful for us. So do that. Each time you hit like, someone else is more likely to receive this revision session, and it's good for more people, right? So let's make a point of doing that. Now, and I remind you, you should have in front of you your notes pages, you should have in front of you your practice questions, which hopefully you've had a go at. You should have in front of you, hopefully, or somewhere near you, your mark schemes and your model answers. This paper 2 stuff with Edexcel is very, very information heavy. It's kind of ironic really, because paper 2 at Edexcel, of course, is smaller than paper 1, but there's lots and lots of content here, and we're going to go through this at quite a rate, okay? So I would also urge you that once you've taken this session, I would also urge you to make really thorough notes in the spaces we provided in the notes pages, and then to come back. I'd also like to stress that the language we're using in this session is absolutely robustly bespoke to the Edexcel exam board and the mark schemes that they have previously published. So if it's said and if it's in an image, you need to be able to repeat that word and use that word in context in your exam answers, okay? So those words are not there accidentally. They are exactly the phrasings that Edexcel accepts. So it really, really is worth learning those. Also, just finally, before we get started, you teachers, just be reminded that if you're interested in our platform and not a subscriber, if you're interested in exam simulator and not yet a subscriber, you can have a free trial for 28 days. It will actually support these young people to get to their exams, and it costs you absolutely nothing. We're not interested in your money. Come and get involved, and we can support you a little bit for the coming weeks. Finally, we think that today the first half session will go a little bit longer, and the second half session will be nice and discreet, nice and sharp. We expect to be with you in the region of an hour this afternoon. Marta, is there anything I've forgotten before we get started?
Nothing I can think of, so I would just go straight for it.
Okay, so we're going to crack on here, folks. Lots of detail, lots of content, paper 2, all the good stuff. Here we go. Oh, the tense bit as I transition. Hang on. Here we go. So let's get going, folks. And look, I mean, just on a technical point, obviously, it's absolutely crucial. You also learn social health, but can we just clarify on the AEI, physical and emotional health, were the two, as it were, sort of consequences of being physically active that were referenced. Hence, I've put an underline under those two. I've included social because, you know, why not? Why wouldn't you include it? It's worth learning. So let's look at the physical impact of long-term physical activity. So if we're active on a long-term basis, what's likely to be the case? Well, we're less likely to become obese. That's a BMI over 30. So we're going to have less a BMI under 30 because we're not likely to become obese. We're less likely to experience conditions like angina, myocardial infarction, or heart attack. We're less likely to experience a coronary blockage, therefore our heart is going to be healthier. On similar points relate to the brain. We're less likely to suffer a blockage to the brain, otherwise known as a stroke, because our blood remains sort of cholesterol free and our blood vessels don't become as inelastic and blocked. Osteoporosis is reduced. Now, osteoporosis is what we technical term for what we call brittle bones. And when we take part in weight-bearing exercise, osteoporosis is far less likely because we get better bone density. If you really want to get super posh about this, you can talk about the calcium matrix. Okay, that's what our bones are made up of. And of course, if it's thicker, stronger, a more dense matrix, they're stronger. And if it's less, we might get osteoporosis and brittle bones. We're less likely to get lifestyle diabetes. When you write about diabetes and being physically active, please try and say type 2. I really do. By the way, I don't know why this is 2B. It should be just type 2. I'm saying you should write it this way, but please get rid of the B there. It should be type 2. I think our illustrator has linked this to muscle fiber types. Anyway, when we get a reduced blood pressure, okay, so less resistance to blood flow, and as I mentioned before, lower cholesterol. So these are all really useful physical benefits. Now, we experience catharsis emotionally. Catharsis is stress relief. It's that kind of I've got through my day and I've moved around a bit, I've played my sport and I've released that stuff. It reduces the tendency for depression or other mental health conditions. It improves confidence, it improves self-esteem, and it makes people feel better about how they look, how they feel. It's not just about how you look aesthetically, but it's actually the feeling of your body. And it's really important to mention that about body image. Yes, we think about what it looks like, whether we're thin or not, or whether we've got a shape we're happy with, but it's also the feeling of confidence around your body shape. Now, social benefits, I'm just going to leave you to kind of peruse, but make sure you can reference these terms, because there's nothing to say it won't come up. We just know for a fact that physical and emotional health benefits will come up, and that's the balance that we want. Okay, one physical health benefit. Notice the word physical. I'm only going to get credit here for physical. One benefit is take part in exercise is reducing the chance of obesity. We agree, BMI less than 30. State two others. So I can't say reduced obesity. I can't say emotional or social. I must say physical, and I've got less likely to be have osteoporosis, and less likely to experience resistance to blood flow or high blood pressure. By the way, a nice term you can include, I should have mentioned it before, high blood pressure is referred to as hypertension. If you want to include that in some of your answers, perfectly reasonable thing to write, and it's a nice term for you to use. One emotional health benefit when taking part in exercise is stress relief. We of course also know this is catharsis, right? That's a term we used above. State two other emotional. So here, same question structure, but we must focus on on emotional. The feel-good factor and reduce mental health issues such as depression or anxiety. So nice. And you can see the other ones there. You can pick up on any of those. There's lots of alternatives, but that's what we're talking about. Now, if we undertake a sedentary lifestyle, what might happen? Of course, there's links here. Now, a sedentary lifestyle is a lifestyle sitting and lying down too much, okay? So basically, to try and picture someone who's sedentary is probably... I want to describe myself to a degree. I go to the gym regularly, but let's assume I didn't for a moment. I'm going to be saying that... I work at an office chair. I don't walk or cycle to work. In the evenings, we've got lots of responsibilities like driving kids to clubs, watching a bit of TV, and I don't do a lot of walking around. I try and walk to the shops, these sorts of things. But my exercise comes through the gym. Now, imagine I didn't have the gym. I would be sitting and lying down for almost the entirety of my life. That is a sedentary lifestyle. So what are the consequences? What happens? Well, our weight. We can become overweight. Now, being overweight is a BMI between 25 and 29. Okay, so just be clear. Being obese is a BMI over 30. So a BMI greater than 30 is overweight. But the other thing is we consider over fat, and this is what we call excessive fat reserves. Now that could obviously be whether we're overweight or obese, but if we've got excessive fat reserves, it means that we're not utilizing that energy that's stored, that sort of potential energy store of fat. We're not using that because we're inactive. But there's risk to long-term health. So we've seen these on the positive. Just as activity prevents depression, sedentary lifestyle can lead to depression. We don't get that release of endorphins and serotonin. We might experience that angina, heart attack. We might experience that blockage to coronary arteries. We might experience hypertension or high blood pressure. We might experience type 2 diabetes. We might experience osteoporosis or brittle bones. We will experience loss of muscle tone. This can have an impact in things like posture, and also sort of like having a sore back, but our posture will reduce. And of course, our fitness will be affected. We will reduce in strength, flexibility, severe injuries. We could go further, right? Muscular endurance, agility, all of these, speed, all of these are going to be the same. But of course, because we're not moving, we're not utilizing these, and it's that kind of use it or lose it reversibility notion, right? Okay, questions here. The graph shows the body mass index, which of course is a measure of body composition of adults in Wheelton by Sea. Analyse the graph and make comparisons between males and females. So two things I want to say here is we should incorporate stats into our answer. Okay, and this skill here, analyse, what we're trying to do here effectively, we're trying to break this into parts and explain it. So let's see what we've got. 20% more females have normal healthy weight. So notice the stats are brought in here. I'm not just saying more females are healthy weight. I'm saying how many more. Males tend to be overweight by how much? 5%. And worryingly, more obese by a factor, should we say, by a factor of 15%. So notice in all three of my answers, I've incorporated stats into my response. And that is an absolutely crucial tip for you folks. If you are asked in essence, to provide a an analysis on, oops, didn't mean to do that. If you're asked to provide an analysis on from a graph, you must incorporate the numbers from that graph, or that table, of course, is the alternative. This one here, osteoporosis is a medical condition that leads to fragile bones, suggests one activity that would reduce the risk of osteoporosis and justify. So I've got to choose, in essence here, folks, I've got to choose something that's weight bearing. So I'm going to go for running, or running regularly. I've gone for long distance running, and it's justified because it's a weight bearing exercise and it builds that calcium deposit in the bone. Okay, I'm just going to take the briefest of pauses there, folks, just because I need to cough and have a little sip of my drink. I'll be straight back to you. Okay, thanks for being patient with me. Sometimes you just need to just take a little breather when you're talking this fast and trying to get this much information out in one go. So thank you. So I want to talk about balanced diet. What is it? A balanced diet is, and obviously you guys probably know the Eat Well plate and all that. Let me spell this better than I just spelled it. We're talking about the right variety of food. So having a variety of nutrition, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. We're talking about the right balance. So for example, having the right proportion of fats to carbohydrates to protein. That's what we mean by a balanced diet. We're also talking about the right amount, and I just want to sort of give a little bit of detail on this one. Generally speaking, for adults, we're talking about women. If I put women like this, we're talking about women having in the region, obviously varies person to person, of 2,000 kilocalories per day. And men, we're talking about having in the region of 2,500 kilocalories per day. If we regularly consume more or less than that, on average, that's going to have an impact in our diet being balanced. And of course, it's going to lead to some of those conditions we talked about before with regard to being overweight, underweight, these sorts of notions. So with this point, this balance point, I just want to draw this out. We're going to argue, and by the way, there are many ways to structure your diet differently to this. We're going to talk about 55 to 65% of one's diet should be carbohydrate. Can I just stress again, this is the exam board's view. I personally know numerous diets which are perfectly healthy and don't adhere to these balances, okay? And of course, if we're a performer and an athlete, we would probably do it that differently to this as well. We're talking about 20 to 30% fat, or lipids, of course, you learn in your biology. And we're talking in the region of 10, it varies the statistics you'll get in here, but 10 to 15% protein. Now, I just want to repeat again, this is what your exam board are going to expect to write. Can I just stress there are many diets which believe that this macronutrient is undervalued in our diet, and I'll leave you to ponder that and to discuss that and to read and all. That's not for me to kind of tell you what I think your diet should be. In fact, I don't know what your diet should be, but I do know that there's a lot of research that's suggesting protein, this is too little, but anyway, that's a whole other story. Now, what we're going to do here is we're now going to focus on those macronutrients. So let's be clear about our carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the preferred energy source at all intensities of exercise. Okay, so carbohydrates, you guys know from your biology, we take them in as carbohydrates in the form of either starches or sugars. We break them down to glucose. Glucose then delivered by the blood into the muscle tissue, and it's delivered into the sarcoplasm of the mitochondria. You guys know that from your biology, but the point I want to make is that glucose, which is broken, we're breaking them down here, that there is a source of energy for aerobic and anaerobic respiration, which we look at in paper 1, right? We look at glucose plus oxygen goes to CO2 plus water plus energy for aerobic. Glucose goes to lactic acid plus energy for anaerobic. But also it's worth noting that we can store carbohydrates as glycogen, and we store it in our liver and in our muscles. So we do have a store of carbohydrate in our body, but it's quite limited, about a 2-hour store. Now, fats or lipids, obviously you guys know about their emulsification by bile, all that kind of stuff from your biology. We're not going to get into that here, but they're also a source of energy. They're there to insulate, and by the way, they're very rich in energy fats actually. They insulate organs, they help us to maintain temperature, they're stored under the skin. There's a really nice term called subcutaneous, which simply means under the skin. If you sort of feel around your own body, you'll notice there's under your skin, there's like a soft tissue. That's your subcutaneous fat layer, right? It's also there for insulation. We don't really insulate us. We don't have a thick layer of fat under the skin because we generally speaking, not exposed to real cold, unlike sort of mammals that live in the sea or whatever. So where am I going with this? We've also got a source of aerobic energy at low intensity. So what we're saying here is that fats, obviously at that fat burning level, 60% of max heart rate and below, that's where we utilize fats for energy in that way. Now, protein, really important structure, of course, they're for muscle growth, they're for muscle repair. You know how proteins are actually processed, right? You know they're eaten, they're taken into the stomach, they're broken down in the process of proteases, they're then delivered to the ribosomes in the cells, they're then the amino acids are then rebuilt into human proteins. You guys know all of that stuff. I'm not going to get into that here, but the point is one of those protein structures is the protein within muscle, and we can rebuild that through the protein we eat and form muscle tissue. So really important, it's about post-exercise consumption. So if we train or compete, it's a really good time to eat proteins. We can also take supplements, and by the way, 30 grams is a nice figure for post-exercise. And also it means that we can, if we take supplements, we can train more quickly again, or compete more quickly, and it increases our protein synthesis. Again, you guys know that happens in the ribosomes in cells. Now, we also want to look at our micronutrients. So first of all, we're going to look at our minerals. Now, what are they? They are trace elements that the body cannot produce. They must come from the outside. We cannot produce zinc in the body. We cannot produce the element iron. We cannot produce calcium. So we must consume it in our food. So very small amounts, but what does calcium do? It's for bone density, mentioned that already. Keeps bones strong, prevent osteoporosis, prevent fractures, obviously. Why do we take on iron in our food, often existing in green leafy vegetables, but also in meats and fishes? Okay, fishes or fish? I always get confused with that one. That forms hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is an iron-based compound, and it's that which binds with oxygen. So iron is required for oxygen transportation in the blood. So if we have iron, we increase oxygen carrying capacity, it decreases fatigue, and it decreases production of, not Arctic, lactic acid indirectly. I think this is what do you call it? An autocorrect, isn't it? Arctic acid. It's an acid you get when you're well cold and knocking about with not penguins. They're at the south, aren't they? And you're knocking about with polar bears. Now, zinc. It promotes healing. It helps with cell growth, mitosis. Now, we're not obviously going to get into mitosis here. You guys study all your anaphase and your telophase in biology. Zinc's really important for our immune system. So again, linked to your biology, you've got your phagocytosis and all that kind of stuff. You guys know what this is. Keeps an athlete healthy, the zinc, and it helps fight sickness. So it keeps us well. And if we're well, we can train. And if we can train, we get fitter. And if we get fitter, we perform better in our sports. So zinc obviously is clearly an important one. Can I also just mention to you that other micronutrients that get mentioned or are accepted, I'm not going to go into what they do, but you'll get credit for naming sulfur and you'll get credit for naming potassium. Now, we're not going to study them in detail, but we just know that on previous Edexcel mark schemes, they've been credited, but the three I've mentioned are your primary three. Right, your vitamins now. Okay, vitamins are all about health. Okay, vitamins are all about health. So just 5 vitamins that you can have an awareness of what they do. So we've got vitamin A, we've got for immunity, for vision, and for skin. This is really what we need to be picking up from here. We've got B1 and actually the B complex vitamins in general. They're really important for releasing energy. So we're going to take on all that iron we talked about in leafy green vegetables, for example, but B1 is required to actually allow that be released. Keep cells healthy in skin and blood vessels. Guys, just one thing. I'm almost reading without thinking. I think this is meant to say B12. I'll quickly check that when I go back, but I'm fairly sure that's meant to say B12. I was just sort of going from the screen, but just bear that one in mind. Keep cells healthy and skin and blood vessels healthy. Okay, so vitamin C, really important for skin and for blood vessels. Okay, but also for general health. And this is really important for preventing disease. So vitamin C to prevent disease. Why is that important to a performer? If you prevent disease, you keep performing, keep training, you get fitter, you perform better. D is for bones, teeth, and muscle health. So obviously vitamin D in combination. Things like calcium really, really important. And vitamin E for skin and eyes, okay? So couple of things. I've pictured fiber in brown. You can figure out why. What does fiber do for us? It helps with digestion. Okay. Now again, you guys are going to be in your biology going to be looking at digestion and the large intestine and all this kind of stuff. But one of the terms we want to make here is that good levels of fiber, especially, and of course we get fiber from vegetables. Essentially, it makes a regularity of stool. And just to be clear, what I'm saying there, it makes you poo regularly and in a consistent way. I don't know what that way is, but the other sort of technical aspect of this is it's really important for the absorption of water. And this absorption of water, it happens, as you guys know in biology, it happens in your large intestine. Okay, so that kind of final stage of digestion, your fiber becomes really important because it actually allows the water to be passed into the body through osmosis. Okay, again, links to your biology. Now, water itself, super, super important. And I want to talk generally about water and what we might loosely call hydration. Okay, so why is water so important? Well, water is important because we can avoid early fatigue. Okay, so if we are performing in our hockey match, if we're horse riding, if we don't have enough water, we're going to fatigue early. It prevents dizziness. Okay, so if obviously on the other side of this, if we become dehydrated, we could experience dizziness and loss of concentration and these sorts of things. It prevents headaches. You will know from your experience that if you get dehydrated, you get headaches. Some of you out there will probably have experienced things like migraines. Horrible, I know it personally, but it can quite often be related. Not in all cases, by the way. I'm not trying to diagnose anyone, but headaches and hydration are quite closely linked together. It also is important from the sweating perspective, which of course is a cooling mechanism. This is used for cooling, so obviously we need water for that process. Let's go a little bit further. We're also saying that fluid is important to maintain temperature. You can call this thermoregulation if you prefer. Maintain body temperature, which of course is really important. You guys know why, because you understand the relationship between enzymes working and temperature, but temperature needs to be maintained, and water is one of the structures that helps with that. It also maintains blood flow. So if we become dehydrated, we reduce our blood plasma and our blood flow slows down because our blood is stickier, thicker. We call it more viscous. Does it actually put that in? Prevents blood viscosity. I'll put blood viscosity going up. Okay, it prevents blood viscosity rising. And final couple of points here, folks. Let me choose a nice little red in here. It maintains oxygen delivery because of that point we've just made, maintains O2 delivery because the blood remains liquid and not too thick. And finally, we're going to say it prevents excessive anaerobic work. So that is why water is so important, why we must consume before, during and after performance, especially performances that have got any kind of long duration nature to them. So using a name mineral in your answer, explain why mineral intake is important. So I've gone for iron, and I've said it's for building red blood cells and allows a performer to transport oxygen so they can work at higher intensities aerobically. Now obviously calcium keep bones healthy, prevent injuries to bones, and you can look at the other examples. But notice there I've got the mineral. I've then got, so what I've got here is I've got the example, I've got the impact and outcome. So think about our linked points here is I've said, okay, we're going to take on iron. The impact is we get more red blood cells. The outcome of that is higher intensities aerobically. So we're clearly answering with our example. Let's go here. Explain why a power athlete must use protein supplementation at the right time in their diet. Proteins cause muscle repair. They're important after exercise. This is when adaptation process happens. Okay, so again, I'm giving my answer and I'm making my linked points. Let's go further. Now we've got our 9 mark. Let's spend a little bit of time on this. Max is a weightlifter. Good one. And is considering his diet for next season's competitions. Good for you, Max. Evaluate the need for Max to consume a balanced diet. Now, when we say about evaluate, we're saying that yes, he should, maybe he shouldn't. We're saying looking at one side, we're looking at the other. We're saying positive. We're saying yes, he must have a balanced diet. No, actually, there's another way of doing this. So what have we got? Balanced diet is right amount of the right variety, the right balance of carbohydrates, proteins, and fat, plenty of vitamins and minerals, staying hydrated. Now he needs. Now we're going into the individual parts. Protein for muscle strength. Now let's link it to performance. Max is likely to eat large quantities of protein, especially after training, so that his muscles adapt and become stronger. To lift heavier weights. You can see how I'm now linking specifically to old buff Max over here. Carbohydrates are a source of energy. We agree, and fuel Max through a 2-hour weight session. I'm linking it to Max's performances. Max is highly likely to eat a large quantity, a proportion of carbohydrates to fuel his training and performances. So he's not eating a balanced, air quotes, diet in a sense. Max does also need to consume fat, as fat is a form of stored energy. Max is likely to consume less fat, so we're applying it to Max as a proportion of diet as proteins and carbohydrates are more important. This actually means Max is not eating a normal balanced diet. So we're actually saying no, he's not doing a normal balanced diet. Max needs to consume vitamins and minerals for good health, to preserve his immune system. And obviously you can give examples of those and not experience reversibility if he gets ill. He also eats fibre to maintain a healthy digestive system. And finally, Max must drink plenty of water to maintain cell function and avoid cramp during training sessions. So we've clearly gone through each of the, we've explained what a balanced diet is, we've gone through each of the components of a balanced diet, we say how it would apply to Max and whether he is actually eating a balanced diet. And we actually said, no, he's not. He's eating way more carbohydrates and proteins, less fats. But for him, that's what is required of him. And it's a nice, concise answer to a challenging 9-mark question. And when I read through that, I'm really confident that I've included all of my knowledge. And that's a really important thing for your 9-marker. This is ultimately on diet and balanced diet. And I'm confident I included everything of my awareness in there. Okay, change of canvas. So let's keep going here before we earn a well-deserved break in the middle. I want to talk to you about open skills. And actually before that, can I just talk to you about classification? It's really important. You might wonder why we do this. We want to know how to practice things, basically. That's what we classify skills for. So by understanding it's an open or closed or basic or complex, we can practice it in the right way. So let's give some examples of that. What is an open skill? An open skill is affected by the environment, okay? Is it affected by the environment? I'm going to be reasonably scruffy here, but I'm going to go for it just so we're nice and quick, okay? So an open skill is affected by the environment. We'd also describe it as an adapted skill, okay? So think about skills that you have to adapt in order to perform them well. We'd also say that things in here, we're going to be talking about things like gameplay. I love the example of defending in basketball or football or hockey or netball. You've got to adapt to what you're doing based on what your opponents are doing. I also think about things like a sprint start. Okay, now you don't have to adapt that, but you certainly have, it's affected by when the gun goes, right? So we've got these sort of notions of open environments. Disappointingly, Edexcel accept reference to whether the weather is different. I utterly disagree with that, but Edexcel do accept whether the surface or the position of the sun. I think that is really not what we should be accepting here. It should be about the nature of the performance, in my opinion. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, we're revising, but it just bothers me a little bit. So you teachers, if we can shift away from that, I think that would be good. But you students out there, apparently you will get accepted for that in describing an open skill. A closed skill clearly is not affected by the environment. Okay, another way of describing this then is a skill that's the same each time. We can call that repetitive. We also, a really nice term you can use here is it's habitual. Okay, you can just do the skill as a habit over and over again. Okay, and it's a nice way for you to be aware of that. So things in here, think about things like, I'll call them field events. Think about javelin throwing, long jump, high jump. They're done the same over and over and over and over again. They're repetitive and habitual because the factors around them don't change. Whereas defending in basketball, you're going to do it completely differently depending on where your opponents are. That's what we mean. Or goalkeeper save. I love the example of a goalkeeper save. Okay, obviously it's clearly open because it depends where the ball is, depends where you're trying to push the ball to and where the attackers are, whether it's hockey or football or whatever. Now let's look at basic and complex skills. What we mean by a basic skill is a skill that requires little thought. Okay, so that can be quite a simple thing, really, isn't it? I suppose it requires little control, and we're going to say it requires little coordination. And we can also say coordination. I didn't finish the writing there. We can also say it's easier to perform. It's easy to perform. Obviously, I'm going down into sort of low and high organisation here. Obviously, this is from above, right? It's easy to perform and it requires little practice. I'll put it up here, little practice. So I would look at sort of like general motor skills here. We were talking about running rather than a sprinting, 100-meter sprinting technique. We would be thinking about things such as jumping. These are quite general basic skills, whereas like a Fosbury flop high jump technique is very complex, really, isn't it? So what about our complex skills then? Well, over here, we are talking about complex skills, which, well, I mean, look, we can just say the same things. Lots of coordination, more control, more thought, more practice. They're hard to perform. I won't bother writing that all in for you. I'm sure that's perfectly plausible for you. So I'm going to give examples of a Fosbury flop, good word, isn't it, technique in high jump. I'm going to give an example here of, let's say, slip catching in cricket. Obviously, you've got to interpret the environment a bit like an open skill. You've got to make decisions. You've got to have a very accurate technique. It has to be honed and developed and practiced over time. And obviously, we can go to other extents here. So here we've got our general movement skills. Here we've got our specific movement skills. And we've also got this notion of thought and decision making in here. Now, let's go one stage further. This is the area that people tend to get a little bit confused about, is organisation. We'll start with low organisation. I'll put it in a nice orange colour here. What we're saying here is that a skill can be broken down into subroutines. Broken down. And the idea, come back to my practice point, is that why would you break a skill down into subroutines? Well, it's because you'd want to practice a subroutine individually. So a really good example of this would be like a gymnastics floor routine. I'll just put floor routine here, because of course you can break each component down into its individual component and practice that by itself. That's what gymnasts do, and it can be broken, would it just put into parts. Okay, but certain skills, they cannot be done that way. Let me just think about another example that we would have over here. Obviously, we can put things like trampolining routine would be a good example. Although you do have to be bouncing in order to be doing that. But a really classic example is a swimming technique. Think about like a breaststroke technique, for example. You can use floats to break down and to practice the legs, the arm, the breathing, the body position, and so on and so on. The turn, all of these can be practiced individually because it's a low organizational skill. Whereas if we go over to high organizational skill, guess what? They can't be broken down into, I'll just put into SR subroutines, yeah? Or they can't be broken into parts. So you cannot break the skill into parts. So what would be an example of this? Well, here's an example, running. You can't realistically run on one leg and not the other. You can't realistically do the head position without the legs moving. Let me give you another example. A golf drive. Okay, it's a powerful event, it's a powerful impact, and we can't really separate it as parts. You can to an extent, because you can just do the backswing maybe, but of course you can't do the through swing without doing the backswing. They're one and the same thing. They're connected, they're linked, and they need to be performed together. So something can't be broken down. Think about a cycling performance. How do you separate parts of riding a bike? You can't realistically do it, can you? You have to do that as a whole. So often what we find with high organisation skills is they're practiced as a whole, and what we find with low organisational skills is they're often practiced as a part, or even in what we call whole, part, whole. We're not going to get into that here. Now, questions. This table includes details of the organisational continuum, probably the hardest one. Describe high organisation and provide two different sporting examples. So we've got high organisation cannot be broken down into subroutines, and I've got a tennis ground stroke cannot be separated, and a high jump technique, it cannot be separated. So here's some lovely examples for you to use in your own answers. Now what we've got here is the justify skill. The image shows all three skill continua, we agree. Justify, which means you have to say why the position of a javelin throw on two. So I'm going to select two of these, and it looks like I've got the open-close continuum, and it looks like here I've got the organisational continuum. So I'm saying javelin is closed. I must say because I'm justifying. It occurs in an open environment that does not change. Javelin is high organisation because it cannot be easily broken down into subroutines. There, I pick up my 2 marks. Notice 2 marks for each one. Now, I've been given all three continua, but this is irrelevant now to me because I've picked open and closed, and I've picked organisational. So if I now go on, it doesn't matter. I must get my 4 marks for talking about the two. Okay? All right, let's move things forward. Another question. This table includes details of the organisational continuum. State the terms that should replace A and B. Now, have a look at that, and you'll see why. A is low, B is high. Make sure you got that the right way around and that you can differentiate those two things. Okay, we're going to move on straight away. Goal setting first of all. Let me just find myself. I've got to be in my notes. Here we go. I want to talk about the use of goals first. Okay, so use of goals first. So why do we use goals? First of all, they're really good for focus. It gives an aim, a specific, we'll come back to in a second, aim. It increases motivation so people know what they're working towards. That motivation leads to effort, task persistence, task adherence. People keep training, keep practicing, put their time in. It allows assessment of, I love this, assessment of progress over time. So this is where I was a year ago, and this is where I was now. Just imagine a use of goal could be something as simple as one's weight. Okay, and if you were to track your weight, and by the way, I'm not suggesting you do this, especially young people, as you've got enough to think about. But someone like me, for example, has got quite a sedentary lifestyle. I could be tracking my weight, and over sort of 5 years, I might know, I've put on 10 kilos, I'm averaging 2 kilos a year, I've got to up my activity levels by so much, whatever. That's actually useful, isn't it, to actually then set a goal. I want to be doing one more training session a week. Otherwise, my weight's going to go up. We can adjust training because we've got the feedback, and it increases attention. That's obviously linked to focus. But we also want to talk about setting goals, and we'll look at examples of these in the question. What do we mean by specific? Well, by specific, we're talking about it being specific to something like a component of fitness. We're talking about a goal being specific to a body part. You know, if I'm a javelin thrower, I'm going to work on the shoulders. We're going to talk about the goal being specific to an energy system. We're going to talk about a goal being specific to a role or a position in the sport. A goalkeeper is going to have to work on a lot of agility and flexibility, for example. So that's how we make our training specific. What about our measurability? Absolutely critical, this point. By setting objective targets for our training, we can directly measure, was it achieved or not? And we should know in any training through goals whether it was a fail or a success. And that is because we have a clear target, often fitness testing related, that we're working towards. Achievability and realism are very similarly linked. Now, by achievable, it means it must be within reach. There's no point setting an 8-year-old child a target of winning a gold medal in the Olympics. It's out of reach. That might be the ultimate overall dream, but the goal will be to increase. 8-year-old you don't do fitness tests with, but the goal would be to work on backhand technique so that you become a better tennis player, making it specific and measurable. Realistic is a very similar point, okay? Realistic. What we mean, this often relates to our time phasing. Okay, so if you're going to improve, let's say, the backhand because you're going to improve your backhand shot consistency by 5%, of fewer unforced errors off the backhand, you must say we want to do that within, let's say, 4 weeks. Okay, because anything shorter than that would make it unrealistic. And that's exactly the point with time bound. We tend to find that goals get set for 6 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks. We must know when this objective measure is going to be achieved by, otherwise we can't ultimately judge whether our training is a success or not. Okay, let's look at some questions on this. That was not meant to beep. In fact, it's my tablet which I'm using for my notes. I'm going to turn the sound off completely. I apologise for that, folks. Back we go. So, questions. A badminton player and his coach aim to improve his shots by 5%. So there's the goal, right? That's the goal that they've set for themselves. Explain how they could use SMART to improve this goal. So this is kind of generic, so it could be more specific. Now, we want 4 marks, so when I say specific, I've got to give an example. For example, measure the goal specifically by making it 5% fewer shots landing out of court. So I'm making it specific. I also say it needs to be time bound, so there's my mark. Would recommend this goal needs to be achieved within 6 weeks. So I'm not just saying that it's got to be the specific, the S and the T. I'm saying how you could go about explaining it. Explain how I'm linking that into my answer. Very similar example here. A shot putter decides she wants to set a goal of throwing an additional 2 meters on average. Explain how she could use SMART principle to improve this. The goal needs to be more realistic. 2 meters is a big improvement, and this could be reduced by 1 meter. So maybe make it 1 meter, it's more realistic. The goal needs to be time bound, a bit like before. She should aim to achieve this within 4 weeks or a specific time period. So again, notice I've said the how, not just make it realistic, not just make it time bound, but how she would go about doing that. Now, I would say in both those questions, I would argue that's as hard as it's going to get for GCSE level, but those are hopefully useful examples for you. Just going to take a pause there just to sip a bit of water. I'm not sure if we're going to break at that point. And we are breaking. Marta just told me we're breaking because I think we went for well over half an hour there. So we'll have a significantly shorter second half there, folks, because we got so much done. But Marta, any thoughts, any questions, any requests on any of that we've just gone through?
Yes, I do have a question, which is from me. I'm not a PE teacher. Could you please re-explain to me a little bit what you refer to by these open and closed skills? I don't quite understand what they are.
Okay, so again, reflecting on the reason for classifying skills is that we want to practice them in the right way. So by identifying which skills are primarily affected by an environment which aren't, we can practice them in a different structure. So let's take an example. If we take something like let's take two very sort of close examples. Let's take taking a penalty flick in hockey and goalkeeping against a penalty flick in hockey. If we take those two examples, taking the penalty flick is much more towards what we call a closed skill. The ball is always a set distance from the goal. It's always in the central position. The ball is also always the same scale, same weight. The foot position of the attacking player is always going to be roughly the same thing, and so on. It's going to be an habitual skill that they can repeat the same over and over again. And of course, the player determines exactly how it's going to be done. But the environment is essentially consistent. Whereas for the goalkeeper, saving that ball is every single time uniquely different, and they have to adapt their saving skill, whatever whatever it happens to be, to the specific requirement of how that player pushes us, flicks the ball towards them, right? So therefore it's an open skill, because the environment, the flight of the ball, the pace of the ball, the angle of the ball, the position of the ball, it determines the way in which the skill needs to be performed. So therefore, if you're a goalkeeper, there's no point playing with a robot penalty flick machine that puts the ball in the same place every time. It's very near pointless. Yes, you could hone a technique, but the reality is that is not how it is in the competitive environment. So you'd always want there to be variability in a goalkeeper's practice, because it's the variability that they're going to experience. For the penalty flick taker, it's far, there's your phone. It's far more predictable of how they're going to take it. So we'll tend to find it'll be practiced in a more closed environment. We actually call it a fixed environment. So that's the primary difference, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Brilliant.
Any other
That
questions?
makes more sense.
Any other questions or thoughts?
No more questions so far.
You feel like you've nailed that SMART principle and how to adapt goals.
Yes, I'm hot to trot on that.
Hot to trot. She's hot to trot. That's what we like to hear. Well, folks, as I said a moment ago, the second half of this session is going to be a little bit short. We're going to do a little bit more on the sports psychology stuff, and then we're going to get towards health and especially about diet later on. Okay, so. Oh, sorry, Martin.
No, I was going to say, and remember, if you've got any questions while you're watching it, do use the chat.
Are you feeling lonely, Marta? Are you urging these youngsters to ask a question or two?
If they want to.
If they've got a real question.
Exactly.
That's what we're looking for, really.
Yeah.
Okay, super. Let's make that transition. We're predicting around about 20 to 25 minutes in our second half, folks. So here we go, paper 2, starting with feedback. Let's see if I can make this work properly. Here we go. Okay, let's talk feedback. First of all, what is it? It helps to correct errors in technique or improve performance. So we're looking at error correction. I think is a really nice term for you to sort of get familiar with, because that's the nature of what feedback is for, okay? And it's used to reinforce the correct technique. So once we get it right, we reinforce it so it's right more of the time. That's what feedback is for. So obviously we've got our 4 different types, our intrinsic, extrinsic, concurrent, terminal. And just bear in mind that intrinsic feedback can be concurrent, for example. Extrinsic feedback can be terminal. These can match. What we can't have is intrinsic and extrinsic together. So what is intrinsic? It comes from the performer. It's about the feeling of the skill. We can add the term here. It's a sense of kinesthesis. That's what we mean by the feel of a skill. Now, positives of this. It's really good for experienced performers. Experienced performers know what the correct feeling of a skill should be so that they can sense that and know whether they got it right or wrong. However, the negatives are it's not great for beginners and novices because they don't know what correct and incorrect feels like yet. That's why novices need extrinsic feedback. This is from an external source, often a coach or a teammate or a parent on the sideline or equivalent. What are they? Instructions, tactics, praise, criticism. I really like the notion of CPs. Coaching points is an example of extrinsic feedback. Why is it good? Brilliant for beginners because they're learning the informational requirements of a particular technique, but it's less useful for advanced. Now, I find this interesting because it's true that advanced learners will rely more on intrinsic feedback. But one of the things, if you work with really high-performing athletes, one of the things they'll ask you is about marginal gains. Tell me how to do it better. Tell me how I can shave a tenth off. Tell me how I can make that slightly better. So I think we've got to be careful with this phrasing because we shouldn't think, advanced performers, they know it all. No, what they need is a really, really high-quality coach who can spot the marginal problems, identify them, and feed them back. So that's a nice sort of intriguing point to go on. Concurrent might not be a word you've come across too often before, but concurrent simply means at the same time. That's all that means, okay? So same time. So feedback whilst the performance takes place. So you're getting feedback whilst you are, for example, you're riding the moguls down the hillside in the Winter Olympics because you're getting that feeling through your legs of what's happening at each point, right? That means that you can adjust your performance because the feedback is concurrent. You can readjust your weight. But the problem is it's not possible for fast skills. So something which is really explosive, like a drive in golf, it happens too quickly. You don't get the feedback during. You can't adjust during. You start it, you go through with it, and then you get the extrinsic terminal feedback at the end. And that's where we come to terminal feedback. It's at the end of performance, or we might want to say after performance. After the skill has been completed. So here, the real positive of this is you can have as much of this as you want. You could have a 2-hour meeting with your coach in the terminal as a terminal piece of feedback after your match, because you've got the time to do it. You take as long as you want with it, but the skill cannot be adapted. It is ended. So it's all terminal feedback is always about the next go, the next match, the next competition, the next training, the next attempt, whatever it happens to be. That's what terminal feedback is used for. Now we've got a couple of questions to have a look at here. We've got the image shows a player performing a volleyball spike. Explain why concurrent feedback is not suitable for this performance. So we're saying why it's not. Spike is quick, explosive, fast. There's not enough time. I've given the why. I've not just said it's too quick. We've said why, lack of time. This one. Justify the following statement. Extrinsic is the most important type of feedback for beginners in sport. Wow, tough question for full marks. It comes from an external source. That's what it is. This means that a novice receives an experienced insight. So an experienced person tells them. It helps with the detection of errors, and this must come from an external source because the novice doesn't know yet the correct feeling. They have to get it from external sources because they can't get it from internal yet. So a nice answer in there. Okay, let's keep going, shall we? We've got factors affecting participation. Now, folks, I completely acknowledge here that this is not the most exciting thing you've ever done in your life, and I've put it into a table, and it's a load of words. The point I want to make here is you're going to get questions about participation on age, income, for want of a better term, gender, disability, ethnicity. Now, it might be you get about 2 of these things, who knows? But the point I want to make here, folks, is you've got to be able to break down and actually go through the points that relate to this. So I'm just going to go through it steadily. So why does age impact participation? Adults earn money. Okay, they can afford things. Adults can afford. But adults may have less time. Why? Because they're working. Maybe they're raising children as well. Young people have less access to transport. That's a negative, right? You want to... my daughter plays table tennis and I'm driving her all over the place. Can't wait till she passes her test. Young people restricted to local opportunities because you can't get to places without support. Elderly may be more frail and certainly seen as more frail. Fewer activities for the elderly. So these are some of the factors related to age which influence performance. Now, obviously, it depends on the nature of the question, which of those you're going to include, but they're factors that you could really be considering. For socioeconomic group or wealth, wealthier people have more money. Well, surprise, they can afford more expensive sports. Tennis, golf would be really good examples of this. Less wealthy might play cheaper sports, athletics, football. Less wealthy might choose boxing or athletics. Why? Because they're accessible to them and they don't cost. Now, athletics, think about things like running, just simply going road running. Yes, you need a pair of trainers or a pair of shoes on, but you can do it really, really cheaply. So that affects participation. What about gender? In our society, male sport is dominant. It's seen as more relevant, higher status. Fewer female role models as a result, which means it creates a bit of a barrier. Less female media coverage. By the way, media coverage is considered to be 20 times more for men than for women's sport. That's coming from an analysis of the BBC Sport homepage. Okay, now the BBC is meant to be the real egalitarian structure, but we're talking about covering 20 articles of men's sports to 1 of female. Wow, so that's quite something. Fewer clubs for females, so this is a lack of provision for females. There's fewer clubs for rugby, for cricket. We get a very high female dropout rate, especially in the teenage years. We get less sponsorship for female sport. It's commercially less viable and less funding for grassroots girls sport. So this all creates barriers to female participation in some areas. Now, if we were talking about certain sports like netball, you'd be, well, hang on a second, most of those things don't apply. That's true, but what about them in rugby? What about them in cricket? This is where these barriers are far more real. Disability. Paralympic sport is less valued than Olympic. I think we all perceive that, even though I think there's been an adjustment. There's certainly less media coverage. There's fewer role models, similar to what we talked about before. You've got the need for adapted sports, which can increase cost, and disabled people face more barriers to kit and equipment and access. So it's basically harder to take part if you're interested in Paralympic sport than, let's call it in air quotes, Olympic sport. Ethnicity, very few non-white people in admin. So the role models in volunteers, coaches, it's very few non-white people in that sport and admin. There are very few non-white people in coaching. This creates a lack of role models. Non-white participation is focused in some sports and not all. So we find, for example, that cricket is very popular with non-white participants. We find that football is popular with non-white participants. But when you get into sports like swimming, when you get into sports like, I'm going to choose something a little bit random here, but when we get into sports such as tennis, these sports are far less commonly played by non-white people in our society. Now, there's obviously tons of exceptions to that. And there's fewer role models for in some sports for non-white people. So ethnicity is influencing how people participate. So let's have a look at some questions. Gender and age are 2 factors that affect engagement patterns in physical activity. Identify 3 others. Ethnicity, wealth, disability. Next one. Have a look at this. According to the study in 2021, the BBC Sport homepage features images of male performers. Well, this is saying 17 times more frequently than female performers. Explain how media coverage might affect female participation. So we're specifically looking at female participation. It can create gender stereotypes. Men and women both follow these stereotypes. There's fewer female role models that emerge, and a tendency that men are more sporty and women are not. So some really nice points. Have a look at the mark scheme as a whole to derive a few others. Okay, we're at the end of a canvas there. I'm just going to pause to change that and I'll be straight back. So let's finish this off strong. I'm just going to move that over a little bit. There we go. Okay, by the way, just as some builders starting some work next door where we are right now, so I hope it's not going to bother you folks too much. You might hear a bit of a rumble in the background. It's not too bad. Okay, we're looking at the impact of commercialisation in the media now. Okay, so we're looking at advantages and disadvantages, commercialisation in the media. Of course, we're not looking at this stage at what commercialisation is. Allow you to look at that in your own time. Here on the AI, we want to look at the evaluative structure. We're interested in looking at specifically the positive, the negative. To begin with on the sponsor, notice as we drag down here, we've got on the sport, we've got on the player or the team, the performers in other words, and we've got on the spectator. These are where you need to focus your attention, folks. And when you get your questions, the questions are going to relate to these specific circumstances. So why is it good for the sponsor? Well, their brand awareness goes up. They become more profitable. We could even say they get a return on their investment. I'd love it if you got ROI, return on investment. Simply means for every pound they put in, they get more pounds back because they're sponsoring. That's what we mean by return on investment. They get increased recognition, even linked to healthy brands, you know, especially if you're like a McDonald's type company, which broadly is not that healthy, well, at all. And I would even question whether it does any good in the world. Anyway, let's not go down that road. But your unhealthy service could get quite closely linked to a healthy product like sport and movement. And of course, you get the potential for a global brand, which can increase sales as a result. But there are negatives for the sponsor. First of all, whoever you sponsor, the team, the player, the performer, whatever, they might go and do something a bit mad, like, you know, get done for doping or whatever it happens to be. I don't mean that getting caught is the mad thing. It's doing the drugs, obviously. You might end up with a poor reputation linked to the wrong individual. You might end up in a drop in sales because there's something negatively that's publicized. And if the performance is not successful, in other words, if the team you're sponsoring or whatever it happens to be is not winning, that is not going to help your sales necessarily, and those things may drop. Now, equivalent things looking at the impact of commercialization on the sport, the actual activity, on the hockey or the badminton or the football or the tennis, whatever it happens to be. First of all, the sport gets more investment. It can invest those things into whether it's grassroots or elite provision or coaching development, whatever it happens to be. Sport is more public and becomes more popular. We get participation increasing because people can see that sport through the media. Sport modernizes to suit media coverage. So in other words, we might get a more modern version of cricket or badminton or whatever, or netball has changed some of its versions recently to become more television friendly. We see that as positive potentially. And sport becomes global with audience all over the world. So the sport effectively, it diversifies and it's protected. It's not going to run out of participants and fans because it's allowed to effectively market itself. But we lose tradition. That original version, probably developed in the 19th century in English public schools for boys, is lost. Maybe that's a good thing, but often many things these are seen as bad. Sport can become nothing but entertainment. Think in your own minds, have you recently had a choice between watching some sport on TV and watching Netflix? Do you see them interchangeably? Does sport have more values than that? It's an interesting question. Is it more important? Negative stories are published, such as drugs and athletics or cycling, so the sport's reputation can be damaged. So think about reputational damage of a sport. A really good example is cycling through the 90s and 2000s, where drug use was absolutely endemic and people don't trust the sport anymore. Sport needs to change rules to suit TV formats that, of course, lost in tradition, and sport can be linked to unhealthy products. Like a really good example is association football or soccer. English word, by the way, not American. Everyone says it's American. It's not. It's from the 19th century public school version of association football. I believe the word was first coined in 1864. So when people say that, you can challenge them. Anyway, football, what was I saying? It's really linked to online gambling. So is this link an appropriate one? Okay, is it reasonable that we have this association? Now, we're also going to look at the impacts of commercialisation on the performers themselves. So just to be clear, it generates income for them. Performer team can purchase equipment and facilities. That obviously is positive. But the performer, better equipment and clothing, more money to pay for facilities, paid to wear sponsors' clothing, higher wages, that's good. Full time because of these points here. That's going to help with performance quality. Can turn performers into heroes and role models. Think about those ones that you view yourself. Who are mine? I guess I've met Dame Kelly Holmes and worked with her now on 3 or 4 separate occasions. I've got to say her. What an absolute legend. Makes role models of these people and they become heroes in your life. More money to pay for better coaching and training. Okay, so that obviously is good for the performers. But there are negatives. Pressure. Change times of competition to suit global audiences. So you've got to compete in a different fashion. If you do anything wrong, it becomes public. Lack of privacy, especially through, think about especially through social media. Sponsors can be controlling and use up your time. Expectations become too high. Everything you do right and wrong is on the TV, on the radio. Time out of schedule to perform sponsor-related roles, making adverts, wearing kit, doing photo shoots, whatever it happens to be. You want to train, you want to get on with it. The one that I always think about with this one is like MMA fighters or boxers sort of in fight week and how much media and press they have to do. It's like flipping heck, these people are cutting weight. They're getting ready for potentially a really harmful sport, and they've got to do all this kind of pretending in front of the camera type stuff, right? Answerable to the media immediately after competing. People get very emotional after especially when they've lost, right? And then you're sort of shoved in front of a camera. That's a problem. And you may have to advertise unethical products such as gambling. And again, can I stress the importance here is that you can evaluate now, because we've got the strengths and the weaknesses, the positives, the negatives, the fors, the against. And what about the spectator? Some nice points here. You get to see it more. You get better quality. You get more storylines and narrativization of what's going on. So it's like you can almost follow it minute by minute. More funding means there's better quality play and the stadia themselves get better. This is all good for the spectator. However, it's blinking expensive, including subscription. Ticket prices go up. Expensive merch. Have you ever tried to buy a full football kit for like a kid or something? My God. Not that I'm going to give you an opinion here. Not that any adult should ever actually wear a football shirt unless you're in a football ground, but you know what I mean. Event timers has changed. So you might be a local, you might be a Manchester boy or girl supporting Man City for argument's sake. And the times of the games are at odd times because it suits like a global audience, not just you getting down to the the Etihad or whatever it happens to be. And then when you're in the stadium, you get a limited choice because the sponsor wants their stuff in there. So explain how a company benefits from sponsoring. So we are interested in the sponsor benefiting from sponsoring or commercialization. The product gains publicity, more likely to buy that product that people are. The sport is seen as healthy, increased profit for the business. We've got our 4 points made. We've got our 4 marks. Clearly coming from that, where our information there. We must realize that was specific to the company sponsoring. If I had written about the impact on the sport, on the impact on the performer, on the impact of the team, the impact on the spectator, I wouldn't have got credit. It had to be for the company. Let's finish off nice and strong. Sporting behaviour. I want to make you aware of the distinctions between gamesmanship and sportsmanship. And I suppose, let's take sportsmanship as our example. What are we talking about here? We're talking about fair play, qualitative fairness, showing respect. NGBs are responsible for encouraging sportsmanship, being gracious in defeat, accepting defeat as part of participation, and not having it make you upset, angry, or frustrated. We're talking about following the rules. And I'd also say the etiquette of the sport. It's not just about following the written rules, but following the unwritten rules of the sport as well. And it's seen as good role modelling for young people. What are examples of this? Well, if we're in something like a football match, it would be kicking the ball out of play if someone is injured to allow that person to receive treatment. It would be shaking hands after a game or competition. Now, we would want to look at the other side of this, not the opposite, by the way, but another feature of sport, which is gamesmanship. Gamesmanship is the following: bending the rules, not breaking them. So any examples of students writing answers which is breaking rules should be rejected for gamesmanship. And I'll give you a good one. Loads of people saying football diving is gamesmanship. Absolutely not. Exaggerating a foul is fine because it's within the rules and it's gamesmanship. Diving is cheating and it's deviancy. So let's get that standard right. Okay. Next one, we've got without breaking them. There we go. We've got as a result of the win ethic. The win ethic is you sort of try and get every opportunity to succeed, to win, and that's the focus of participation. Not just participation, but we're going to do it fair. We're going to do it within the rules, and it's due to the increased importance of winning. So this is a nice term here, and the pressure that comes with it. So wasting time now until that can lead to breaking the rules. Okay, so let's just say let's delete that. Let's just delaying in sport. That can be quite handy if it's a time-limited environment. But let's waste time. I feel is too strong. Appealing for decisions in sports like football is completely acceptable. If this was rugby, this would be deviancy because it's against the rules. Okay, so it depends on the rules of the game. If you were to appeal for decision in tennis, it would be a deviant behaviour as it's against the rules, okay? But obviously this has been taken from kind of like a football example. Isn't it odd that we use football as an example of gamesmanship all the time? Now then, we're also interested in deviance or deviancy. Both words are fine. What is it, first of all? It's cheating. It's outside the rules. Examples are match fixing, doping, violence, and faking injury. I've put that one in there deliberately. But can I also just reference this as a form of deviance? This is what's called positive deviance. And it's the idea of overtraining to the detriment of your own health. So if you want to win so badly, you train too much that you experience a stress fracture or whatever, that would be considered overtraining as a form of deviance. So why are people generally, especially this bunch here, why do people become deviant? This is not the same as the win ethic. This is the win at all costs mentality. Whatever it takes, cheating included, to win. Doping would be a great example of that. People do it. Why? For rewards, money, pressure from a coach. Culture of cheating within the sport. Cycling is a good example of the doping. People might do it because they're frustrated and simply because they want to win. Think about the violence one. What are the different reasons you might become violent? Well, one is because you've got annoyed and frustrated. Another one is that you're in a culture where it's kind of violent. But the other one would be you're going to kind of crock the best player on the opposition team, so you've got a better chance of winning. What happens if you're deviant? Bans, fines, loss of sponsorship. Best example by an absolute mile is Armstrong for that. Lance Armstrong, that has lost, I believe, £70 million worth of sponsorship in one day. Negative role model, obviously you lose your reputation. You could be in prison. A good example of this would be Marion Jones, a sprinter. She actually went to prison for perjury, which is lying under oath. She lied under oath when taking part in I can't remember what the Americans call it, but a sworn confession, and also the loss of your medals, loss of your records, loss of your titles. All of these are consequences of being deviant. Okay, let's look at some answers. Using an example of deviant behaviour in your answer, describe the consequences of an elite performer displaying deviance. So we're talking about doping or PEDs. We've given the example of an anabolic steroid. When Dwayne Chambers did this, I'm actually going to reflect on this. I think he took HGH. No. Actually, that's not true. He didn't take HGH. He took a substance called tetrahydrogesterone, which is called THG, which is a steroid, but it's a synthetic steroid. I don't know if you know much about Dwayne Chambers, but he got wrapped up in what's called the Balco controversy, and there were very modern drugs being provided to this athlete as well as others, and they were undetectable at the time. And he was Britain's #1 sprinter. It wasn't until relatively recently, and he eventually got caught. So he says, when Dwayne Chambers did this, he made his races unfair as he has an advantage over others. By being caught, he damaged the reputation of athletics, a very negative role model, and the sport lost credibility. So we've got 3 additional points there. There are others that you can have a look at in here as well. Health impact, loss of sponsorship. By the way, I probably should have got this one because I've got here advantage over the other unfair advantage. That probably should have been in as a correct answer there. In fact, let's put that in. So that would be point number 3. Let's give that there. So that would be a completely reasonable answer for that one. Have we got any others? No, we are done. Okay, lovely. I don't know why I'm scrolling up. We are going to come back onto the camera and have a conversation. Well, I think that was pretty epic. What people might not realise is Marta's what is that called? No, not that. Don't want to mention that. Marta's doing some kind of makeup manicuring thing here while she's answering the questions. It just made me laugh when I looked over. Anyway, Marta, do we have any questions?
It's called multitasking.
Multitasking is exactly what it is. Do we have any... When I started saying that, Marta went, no. Do we have any questions?
Yes. James, can you clarify what the difference is between win ethic and win at all cost mentality?
Brilliant question. Absolutely brilliant question. So the win ethic broadly is a positive thing in sport. If you're playing sport, which is by its nature is competitive, the win ethic broadly is a positive thing. The win ethic is the determination that you're going to train your hardest, that you're going to push yourself, that you're going to try and find those marginal gains, that you're going to value winning in the competitive scenario over participation. You're there to win. Okay, that's what you're there, and you're going to find within the rules the models and the ways in which you can gain that advantage. Classic examples would be having a lighter bike when cycling. Classic examples would be trying a new protein supplement so that you can train harder. This is the notion of the win ethic, fighting for every advantage that you can have, but doing so fairly. The win at all cost mentality breaks that line and goes into doing whatever it takes, regardless of the rules, to win for yourself and for your team. So win at all costs would also include things like cheating, doping, deviancy, potentially violence, match fixing. These are all the win at all costs mentality. It doesn't matter who you tread on, it doesn't matter what laws you break, it doesn't matter what rules you go against, you are going to win. And that's the win at all cost mentality. And people tend to blend and merge these two terms, and they shouldn't. The win ethic, we often call it the Lombardian ethic, is quite a positive thing in sport, not always in life. Not always when you're with your friends, not always when you're just doing things for recreation, physical recreation, but when you're competing in sport, the win ethic is quite positive. Win at all costs is a very dysfunctional attitude. It means that you will hurt yourself and people to get to that win, that fame, whatever it is that you're striving for, and that's the difference there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, brilliant.
Okay, with that in mind as well, can I also just reiterate a point I made before? I mentioned positive deviancy in our examples there. I don't particularly think that you're going to get that as a question or anything where you won't get it as a question. Maybe it might feature in the mark scheme, it's possible. But I just wanted to introduce that to you because a deviant behaviour is part of what I just said before, which is sacrificing yourself to achieve something. So overtraining to such a degree that you damage yourself potentially permanently, and something, you ruin your hips or your knees or you whatever it happens to be because you just keep training and training, that would be considered deviant behaviour. And that sort of balance and the application of principles of training, albeit from paper 1, are good examples of when that shouldn't happen. Okay, so yeah, any other questions, Marta? Anything you'd like me to finish off with? Because of course we've got another session at 5:45. We've got OCR GCSE PE paper 2, and we might even have a little break here. Look, finishing at 5:05, nice and early. Amazing. Delivered those sessions. Any more questions for you, Marta?
No, there aren't any more questions, no.
In that case, it leaves me to say the following. In essence, folks, I'm not going to be delivering any further to you for your Edexcel GCSE PE this year. So a couple of things I'd like to say. First of all, go smash it, and I'm sure that you will. Secondly, the words, the phrasing, the concept that I've used in both paper 1 session for Edexcel and paper 2 are the exact requirements of Edexcel in those areas of the AEI. Therefore, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of you consuming and being able to reproduce those words, those concepts in context when you answer your questions. I really endorse you to do that, so put time into it. Also, I'd like to add that some of you are going to go from GCSE PE to A-level PE or BTEC sport, whatever it is. Just remember as well, we are here to provide you and support and serve you when it comes to those qualifications as well. We work with thousands and thousands of A-level PE students, and I think we are a very significant contributor to the growing success of that qualification. So should you go in that direction, I really urge you to maybe be aware of our work. Finally, along that same theme, I have a blog post which is sort of in the ether at the moment, it's developing, and the blog post is titled, Dear Student, You Should Study A-Level PE Because. And I'm going to write a blog post really addressed to you folks to consider that qualification for the future. And I hope that the teachers who are taking part in this session might consider sharing that blog post with you when it's the appropriate time. Okay, Marta, anything else you'd like me to mention?
No, nothing else. Just wish everyone the best of luck.
They don't need luck.
They don't
Come
need
on.
luck.
They don't need the luck.
As I was going to say, I thought it's not. I know it's not the. It's
what
not
do
the
you
right...
say? I've coached a lot of sport in my time. Coached a lot of football. You say good luck to like some footballers, they get offended.
I know. I know it's not luck, but I don't know. I hope it goes really well and they perform really well and they get a chance to show everything they've learned and do it as well as possible.
That's exactly it. Go perform. Go do it. Make it happen. Believe in yourselves and value yourself enough that you put time, energy and effort into that and take it where you want to take it, whatever subject happens to be. Be proud of yourselves, folks. Have a good one. Take care. Oh, press the wrong button. Take care. Here we go.